Imagine the scene. It's the very early hours of the morning, just past 1 a.m. The date is April 18, 1955. We're inside Princeton Hospital, New Jersey.
It's quiet.
So quiet. You can just picture it, right? Dim lighting, the halls smell of antiseptic.
Right.
And lying in a bed is a 76-year-old man whose name has, well, it's literally become the synonym for genius.
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein. And he's dying.
It's just such a heavy moment to visualize. I mean, it's really the end of an era.
It absolutely is. And in those final, those fleeting moments, his abdominal aneurysm is taking its final toll, and he starts muttering.
Right.
He's speaking softly, maybe a bit urgently, but he's speaking in German.
And this is the first just tragedy of the story, isn't it? The first piece of lost data. The night nurse on duty, she didn't speak a word of German.
Not a single word. So she's just there to comfort him, and suddenly you have the most important mind of the 20th century delivering his final monologue. And it falls on ears that can't interpret the signal.
So whatever he was trying to get out, a final equation of message, a goodbye.
It's just gone. Lost to history. He took 2 last breaths, and then it was just silence.
But here's the thing about this story. Usually that silence is where the biography ends, you know? The screen fades to black, the credits roll.
Right, the end.
But in this case, the silence was just the prelude. It was the curtain rising on one of the weirdest, most macabre, and frankly, most ethically complex stories in the entire history of science.
It really, really is. It's a story that just completely blurs the line between reverence and, well, theft. Because Einstein had a plan, didn't he?
Oh, he had a very clear plan.
He knew who he was. He knew the world was obsessed with him, not just as a physicist, but as this pop culture icon. He had very specific wishes for what should happen when he died.
Extremely specific. He was, in many ways, a humble man, despite all the fame. He told his biographer, and this is a direct quote, "I want to be cremated so people don't come worship at my bones."
No shrines.
Yeah.
No relics.
Exactly. He wanted his ashes scattered in secret. He just wanted to disappear to prevent a pilgrimage site where people would come and, stare at his grave.
And on paper, he got the cremation. But he didn't really get the disappearing part, did he?
Not at all.
Because while his body was being prepared for that cremation, something was missing. The most important part was missing.
The brain.
Someone had stolen Albert Einstein's brain.
And stolen is a heavy word, but you know what? It fits. This wasn't some authorized medical procedure that the family requested.
Yeah.
This was a heist, performed by the pathologist on call, a Dr. Thomas Harvey, and that single act kicked off an odyssey that lasted for decades.
We are not just talking about some medical sample sitting neatly in a sterile lab.
Oh no! We are talking about the world's most famous brain traveling in a cider box, stashed under beer coolers.
Slices of it being mailed around the world in mayonnaise jars. It's unbelievable.
It sounds like a bad B-movie plot, like an urban legend you'd hear at a bar. But it's all documented.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We've got a massive stack of sources here, everything from National Geographic and the BBC to deep dives from journalists like Stephen Levy and Michael Peterniti, and of course, the actual scientific papers that came out of all this.
Papers published in journals like The Lancet and Brain.
So we're going to try and answer the questions that drove Thomas Harvey to do what he did. Was Einstein's brain actually different? Did the anatomy, the physical stuff, create the genius? Or did the genius shape the anatomy?
And the big one. Was this a crime against a dying man's wish, or was it a necessary evil for the sake of human knowledge?
Let's go back to that morning then. April 18th, 1955, the autopsy. Thomas Harvey is the pathologist. Now, for context, Harvey wasn't some world-renowned neuroscientist, was he?
Not at all. He wasn't a brain specialist. He was a general pathologist at a local hospital. His job was supposed to be a standard procedure.
Just determine the cause of death.
Theoretically, yes, that was his only job. Harvey's mandate was just to confirm why Einstein died.
Which he did.
He did. He determined it was a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Basically, the main artery in his abdomen it blew out. A catastrophic, fatal event. He confirmed that.
And that should have been the end of it.
That should have been the end of the report. Stitch him up, release the body to the funeral home, but then he kept going.
He didn't stop at the abdomen?
No. He made the standard Y incision to open the chest cavity. That's normal. But then he moved to the head. He made an incision from ear to ear, peeled back the scalp,
Oh, wow.
and sawed through the cranium. He severed the spinal cord, removed the brain, and waited.
And I read he didn't stop there either. He took more.
He did. He also removed Einstein's eyes.
The eyes. I feel like that part gets left out of the story a lot. Why on earth the eyes?
It feels almost medieval, doesn't it? Like he was collecting relics, he removed the eyes and actually gave them to Einstein's ophthalmologist, a man named Henry Abrams.
And where are they now?
The rumor has it they're still in a safety deposit box, somewhere in New York or New Jersey. But the brain Harvey kept for himself.
Okay, this is the part that just blows my mind. The body, the rest of it is cremated that same day. The ashes are scattered by the Delaware River. The family, especially Einstein's son Hans Albert, they think everything went according to plan.
They think they fulfilled his wishes.
They're grieving, they're processing this immense loss. When did they find out they'd been duped?
They found out the same way the rest of the world found out. They read it in the newspaper.
You're kidding me. Imagine reading that over your morning coffee. Oh, by the way, Dad is missing his brain.
The New York Times ran a front page article. The headline was, "Key clue sought in Einstein brain." And it just casually mentioned that the brain had been removed for scientific study.
I can't even imagine Hans Albert's reaction.
Pure fury. This was exactly what his father had feared. The fetishization of his remains, the treating of his body like an object.
So the family storms in. They confront Harvey. This have to be the moment where Harvey hands it back right. Or gets fired and the brain gets cremated to set things right.
That's what should have happened. But that's not what happened. Harvey was, well, he was persuasive. Or maybe just incredibly stubborn.
How did he talk his way out of this?
He managed to convince Hans Albert that this wasn't about celebrity, this was about science. He framed it as a duty to humanity. He told him that they had this unique opportunity to find the secret of genius.
Wow.
He promised he wouldn't use it for publicity, that he wasn't going to put it in a museum or sell tickets. He promised he would marshal the world's greatest specialists to study it, and that the findings would be published in reputable scientific journals.
So he basically positioned himself as this humble caretaker of a scientific treasure. I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this for science.
Exactly. And somehow, reluctantly, Hans Albert granted permission retroactively.
Retroactive.
But with a very strict condition. It had to be for science only. No sensationalism, no tourism.
I feel like no sensationalism went out the window the moment he stole it in the first place. But okay, so he has permission. But he didn't keep his job, did he?
Oh no, Princeton Hospital was not pleased. I mean, you have to understand, they had a pathologist who had just caused a massive international incident and distressed the family of their most famous patient.
They must have been furious.
They demanded he surrender the specimen to the hospital's collection, and Harvey refused. He claimed it was his responsibility now. He claimed ownership.
Yes, so they fired him.
He was dismissed, and this is the turning point. This is the moment where Thomas Harvey goes from being a respected pathologist at a prestigious hospital to being a guy with a brain in a jar and no job.
It's a tragic arc in a way.
It really is. He had these huge professional hopes. He genuinely thought this brain was going to be his ticket to medical immortality. He thought he would be the man who coordinated unlocking the secrets of relativity within the neurons.
Instead, it became an albatross.
A cursed relic, as some journalists described it. It ruined his career. It eventually ruined his marriage. It dictated the rest of his life.
So he leaves the hospital. He takes the brain with him. What does he actually do with it? You can't just, put a brain on the mantelpiece. It's biological material. It decomposes.
Well, before he left Princeton, he did do some very important preservation work. And we have to give him credit here because this is crucial for the science that comes decades later.
Yeah.
He injected 10% formalin through the internal carotid arteries to fix the tissue. That basically stops it from rotting. He suspended it in fluid. He photographed it from every single angle, and this is a key detail we'll come back to. He took photos of the whole brain.
Because it didn't stay whole for very long.
Exactly. He took the brain to a lab in Philadelphia, and he dissected it. He cut it into 240 blocks.
240.
And he drew a roadmap, labeling where every single block came from. He embedded these blocks in celloidin, a kind of plastic-like substance to preserve them. Then he created 12 sets of microscope slides with hundreds of slices of tissue in each set.
I remember reading a description from the journalist Stephen Levy, who tracked Harvey down years and years later. He described how the brain looked in the jars.
What did he say?
He called it a conch, shell-shaped mass of wrinkly material, the color of clay after firing. It's such a vivid image.
It is. And other jars contain blocks that Livy described as being the size of Goldenberg's peanut chews.
That is such a specific and slightly disturbing image.
Yeah.
Here is the seat of the theory of relativity, and it looks like a peanut chew.
It really highlights the dissonance of the whole story, doesn't it?
It does.
You have the highest abstract thoughts of humanity general relativity, the photoelectric effect, the equation that explains the energy of the stars reduced to chunks of preserved meat in a jar. It's almost impossible to reconcile those two images.
So Harvey has the blogs, he has the slides.
Okay.
He promised Hans Albert he would publish findings soon, did he?
No, and that's where we enter the lost years part of the story. Harvey promised publications within a year. But a year passed, then 5, then 10, then 20. Just silence.
Why? I mean, was he studying it and just not finding anything? Or was he just hoarding it?
It seems like it was a bit of both. He did send some slides to a few neuropathologists in the 1950s, but you have to remember the technology of the time. They looked at them under a standard microscope and basically said, looks like a normal brain.
There was no EMC horror written on the neurons.
Right. And Harvey wasn't a brain specialist himself. He was a general pathologist. He didn't have the expertise to find the subtle differences he was hoping for. He was waiting for the right researchers, but he was also just incredibly protective of it. He became like Gollum with the ring.
And meanwhile, his own life is just falling apart.
Completely. His wife at one point threatened to dispose of the brain. She was sick of having it in the house in her life. That led to a divorce. He moved around the Midwest. He lost his medical license in 1988 because he failed a competency exam.
Wow.
And he ended up working on an assembly line in a plastic extrusion factory in Kansas.
Imagine that. You're working on an assembly line, making plastic molds, and in your apartment, tucked away, is the brain that completely changed our understanding of physics.
It gets even more surreal. He was keeping the brain in a cider box.
A cider box? You mean like a cardboard box for apple cider?
Yes, a cardboard cider box. Stashed under a beer cooler in his modest apartment.
Unbelievable.
He'd moved to Lawrence, Kansas at one point, and guess who his neighbor was?
I love this detail. It feels like something out of a novel. William Burroughs.
The beat poet. The naked lunch guy. The very same.
So they were neighbors.
They'd sit on the porch and drink together. And Burroughs, being Burroughs, would brag to people. He'd say, I can get a piece of Einstein anytime I want. It became this weird local legend.
It just strips away all the reverence, doesn't it? It's so gritty, it's like American Gothic. And speaking of stripping away reverence, we have to talk about the cheese board incident.
Oh, the 1994 BBC documentary Relics. This is a hard watch for some people.
So set the scene for us. There's a Japanese professor, Kenji Sugimoto. He's a huge Einstein superfan.
A devotee.
He travels all the way to Kansas to find Harvey. He wants to see the brain.
And he treats it like a pilgrimage. He's wearing a suit. He's incredibly respectful. Harvey welcomes him in. And then there's this scene. It takes place in the kitchen.
Okay.
Harvey takes one of the jars out. He takes a block of the brain out of the alcohol solution. He puts it on a wooden cutting board. It looks for all the world like a cheese board. And he slices a piece off.
With what? A kitchen knife?
It looks like a standard kitchen knife.
Yeah.
And he puts this little sliver in a medicine vial and gives it to Sugimoto as a souvenir.
And how does Sugimoto react?
He's overwhelmed. He's practically crying with joy. He hugs Harvey. But the sheer casualness of it, Harvey slicing up Einstein's brain on the same board where he probably cuts his cheddar, it just shows how desensitized Harvey had become.
To him, it was just a specimen.
To him, it was a specimen. To the world, it was a holy relic. And that contrast is the absolute heart of this entire story.
That dichotomy between Einstein the man and Einstein the object.
Precisely. And that objectification just kept going. Which brings us to 1997 and the road trip.
Driving Mr. Albert. This is the Michael Paterniti book, right?
Yes. Paterniti, who's a writer, offers to drive Harvey across the country. Harvey is an old man by this point. He's over 80. And he wants to visit Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn, who lives in California.
So they pile into a Buick Skylark, a rental car.
And the brain is in the trunk, inside a Tupperware container.
Just bouncing around in the trunk of a Buick Skylark on the I-70. It's completely insane.
Paterniti describes these long stretches of silence on the drive where Harvey would just stare out the window, and these silences would, quote, last the length of a state.
Wow.
So they drive all the way to California. Harvey meets Evelyn, and there's this really awkward moment where he considers giving her the brain. He actually accidentally leaves it at her house when they go out for dinner.
And what does she say?
She doesn't want it. I mean, what is she going to do with her grandfather's brain in a jar? It's a burden. It's this literal piece of dead weight from her family's past.
So the brain travels all the way across the country.
Only to end up right back where it started. Harvey returns it to the pathology lab at Princeton.
A full circle. A very, very strange circle. But let's pivot here. Because for all this weirdness, The cider boxes, the Tupperware, the cheese boards. Eventually, science did happen.
It did.
Harvey finally started sharing the samples with people who could actually analyze them using modern techniques.
He did. It took a very long time, but starting in the mid-'80s, we began to see papers published. And this is where we have to put our skeptical hats on, because the findings are, well, they're fascinating, but they are very controversial.
Right. So let's unhack the science, the hardware of genius, if you
Yeah.
will. The very first thing they look at was the weight, which you mentioned,
Yeah.
1,230 grams.
Which was a massive disappointment to the bigger is better crowd. 1,230 grams is actually on the lower end of normal for an adult male. The average is usually around 1,400 grams. So it proved pretty definitively that genius isn't about having a giant head with a giant brain inside. It's about architecture, not sheer volume.
Okay, so if it's not size, maybe it's composition. And that brings us to Marian Diamond. She's a researcher at UC Berkeley. It's 1985. She requests samples from Harvey.
And Harvey sends them. 4 pieces of the brain sugar cube sized in a mayonnaise jar.
Classy.
Very. But Marian Diamond was a pioneer. She was interested in glial cells.
Glial cells, break that down for us. For a long time, neuroscience just ignored these, right?
Totally ignored them. For decades, we thought neurons were the only stars of the show. They do the electrical firing, they send the signals. We thought glial cells were just the packing peanuts of the brain, just there to hold the neurons together.
Right, glia comes from the Greek for glue.
Exactly. But Diamond knew they were more than that. They provide nutrients, they provide oxygen, they clean up waste for the neurons, they are the pit crew for the race car.
So what was the ratio in Einstein's brain? What did she find?
She compared Einstein's samples to a control group of 11 male brains, and she found that in the left inferior parietal lobule, an area associated with synthesizing information from different senses, Einstein had a significantly higher ratio of glial cells to neurons.
So, more support staff for the neurons.
That's the implication. The idea was that his neurons were working harder, they had higher metabolic needs, they were firing so often and so intensely that they needed more glial cells to keep them fed and functioning. It suggested a brain that was, running hot, a high-performance engine that needs more coolant and fuel.
That sounds really compelling, but
There's always a but. The study has been heavily criticized.
why?
First, the control group. She used brains from a VA hospital. These were men who had died of non-neurological causes, but we don't know their IQs. We don't know their histories. They could have been cognitively impaired for all we know.
So she might have been comparing Einstein, a theoretical physicist, to people with average or even below average intelligence, or people with health issues that affected their brains in ways we don't understand.
Exactly. And also, she looked at 4 different areas and 7 different measurements within those areas. Only one of those measurements showed a statistically significant difference.
Wow.
Critics call this cherry picking, or the multiple comparisons problem. If you measure enough things, eventually you'll find a statistical anomaly just by chance.
It's like if you roll a pair of dice enough times, you're bound to get double sixes eventually. It doesn't mean the dice are loaded.
That's a perfect analogy.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move forward. 1996. A researcher named Britt Anderson, what did he look at?
He looked at the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain right behind your forehead, the part associated with planning and, complex behavior.
Right, the executive function center. And he found that Einstein's cortex in this area was thinner than normal, but the neurons were more densely packed.
Tighter packing. What's the advantage of that?
The theory is all about communication speed. If the neurons are physically closer together, the transmission time for signals is reduced. It's like living in a dense city versus the suburbs. It's easier and faster to get a message to your neighbor if they are right next door.
So a shorter commute for the data, faster processing.
That's the idea. But again, you have the N of 1 problem, sample size of 1. It's a really interesting observation, but it's hard to prove it's the cause of genius.
Then we get to what feels like the big one. 1999. Sandra Wiedelson. She had a huge advantage over the previous researchers, didn't she?
A massive advantage. She had access to those original photographs that Harvey took in 1955 before the brain was cut up. This allowed her to see the gross anatomy, the overall shape and structure.
And a better control group.
Much better. She had 35 brains from the McMaster University Brain Bank with known IQs and detailed health histories, so it is a much more rigorous comparison.
And she found something weird about the parietal lobes.
Very weird and very interesting. The parietal lobes are the part of the brain responsible for spatial reasoning, mathematical thought, and 3D visualization. Wiedelson found that Einstein's parietal lobes were 15% wider than the average brain.
15%, that's huge.
It's a massive difference in biology. Usually we're talking about fractions of a percent. They were so wide, they actually made his head shape slightly more spherical.
But the reason why they were wider is even more interesting, right?
That's the kicker. She noticed that a specific anatomical feature was missing, or at least partially absent: the Sylvian fissure.
Unpack that for us. What is the Sylvian fissure?
It's a deep groove, a sulcus, that typically separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. In most people, it runs pretty deep. It's like a valley separating two different countries on a map.
And in Einstein?
In Einstein, it was shorter. The valley didn't extend as far, and the area where it usually is was filled in with extra brain tissue.
So the border was missing.
Exactly. And Weidelson's theory was that this lack of a physical border allowed the neurons in that area to connect more easily. It allowed for crosstalk between different regions of the parietal lobe that are usually separated.
It's like taking down the wall between the engineering department and the design department. Suddenly, the ideas can flow much faster.
That's a great way to put it. And this connects so perfectly to how Einstein described his own thinking process.
He famously said he didn't think in words.
No, he thought in images. He visualized the theory of relativity by imagining himself riding on a beam of light. He called it combinatory play. He saw structures and moving pictures in his mind.
So if his parietal lobes, the visual and spatial centers, were hyperconnected because that fissure was missing, it aligns perfectly with his subjective experience of how he thought.
It really does. It suggests his brain was literally wired to visualize mathematics.
That feels like a real aha moment. It matches the biography. But there's one more major study to cover. Dean Falk in 2012 and 2013.
Right. Dean Falk is a biological anthropologist. And she also worked with those original 1955 photos, some of which hadn't been seen before. She essentially did a complete audit of the brain's surface.
And she's the one who found the knob.
The omega sign, or the knob. On the right motor cortex, that's the strip of brain that controls movement, she found this distinct knob-like protrusion. This specific area corresponds to the control of the left hand.
And Einstein was right-handed, but he was a passionate violin player.
Exactly. And when you play the violin, your left hand is doing all the complicated, intricate work, the fingering on the strings. The right hand just moves the bow back and forth.
So he had a musician's bump on his brain.
Essentially, and this brings up that classic chicken and egg question.
Right.
Did he have that knob because he was born a genius? Or did that knob develop because he started playing the violin at age 6 and practiced obsessively for years? We know the brain is plastic. It changes with use. If you learn to juggle for 3 months, the structure of your brain actually changes.
So that's the nurture argument. The violin shaped the brain, not the other way around.
It's very likely. Falk also found other things. She found that his prefrontal cortex, again, that executive center, was highly convoluted. Most people have 3 ridges or gyri in the midfrontal lobe. Einstein had 4.
More surface area.
More surface area means more processing power for things like planning, working memory, and focus.
And she also looked at the corpus callosum, right?
The bridge between the left and right hemispheres. She found it was thicker than in the control brains. This suggests enhanced cooperation between the two sides of the brain. The logical, mathematical left side was talking very efficiently to the creative, spatial right side.
So if you sum all of these studies up, Diamond, Anderson, Whittleson, Falk, you get this picture of a brain that is wider in the math centers, better connected between hemispheres, has more support cells for high energy use, and more surface area in the planning centers. It really sounds like a supercomputer.
It does. It sounds incredibly convincing. It paints this picture of a biological machine that was just perfectly optimized for physics.
Yeah. Here it comes. The buttus.
We have to talk about the skeptics. And the loudest, most eloquent voice here is Terence Hines, a psychologist at Pace University. He calls all of this neuromythology.
Neuromythology, I love that term. It sounds like a religion based on brain scans.
His argument is simple and honestly pretty devastating. It's the stamp collector analogy.
Okay.
He says, imagine you take a stamp collector, a passionate one. You scan his brain, then you compare it to the brains of 100 people who are not stamp collectors. You will find something different. Maybe a ridge here, a bump there, a slightly deeper fissure somewhere else. Brains are like fingerprints. They all have unique variations.
And if you find a little bump, you shout, aha, I found the stamp collecting center of the brain.
Precisely. But it might just be random variation. Hines argues that these researchers started with the conclusion Einstein was a genius. and then went looking for physical evidence to support that conclusion. They ignored everything that was normal, which was most of the brain, and they fixated on the anomalies.
It's classic confirmation bias.
Absolutely. And then there is the insurmountable problem of N of 1. You simply cannot do statistical science with a single subject.
Right. We don't know if there are people walking around right now with brains just like Einstein's who are currently working as baristas or accountants and not revolutionizing physics.
Exactly. We don't have a control group of other geniuses to compare him to. We don't have Newton's brain or Galileo's brain preserved in a jar.
Maybe all geniuses have that missing Sylvian fissure. Or maybe just Einstein did, and it had nothing to do with his physics at all. Maybe it was related to his known dyslexia or his late speech development.
Right. We know he didn't speak fluently until he was 3 or 4. Maybe that missing fissure caused the speech delay and the visual thinking. We just don't know.
And that's the frustrating part, isn't it? We want the answer to be in the meat. We want to be able to point to a gyrus and say, that's it, that's where EMCL lives.
It's a very human desire. We want genius to be tangible. We want it to be biological destiny, or at least anatomically explicable. Because if it's just the mind, this abstract software running on standard hardware, that's somehow even more mysterious.
And it suggests that maybe potential is more about the software than the hardware. The genius isn't just born, it's made through curiosity and effort and a lifetime of intense thinking.
Which is a much more hopeful idea, really.
So after all this, where is the brain now? If you, our listener, want to see the knob or the missing fissure, can you?
You can, but you have to go to the right place. The only place with pieces on permanent public display is the Mütter Museum in Philadelphia. They have some of the microscope slides that Harvey prepared. You can walk right up and look at a slice of Einstein's brain.
That is definitely on my weird road trip list.
And also, the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Silver Spring, Maryland, has the main Harvey collection. The photographs, the roadmap he drew of all the blocks, and thousands more slides. And incredibly, there was an iPad app released a few years ago.
An app? You're kidding.
An app. They digitized the slides. You can scroll through Einstein's brain tissue on your tablet, zooming in and out as if you had a microscope right there.
Talk about the democratization of science.
Oh.
Or, I don't know, the ultimate trivialization, depending on how you look at it.
It feels like it's both, doesn't it? It's accessible, but it's also just strange.
And the rest of the blocks, the peanut cues.
Most of them were eventually returned to the University Medical Center of Princeton. They sit in a safe. But, as we mentioned, Harvey sent pieces out to researchers all over the world for decades. It is highly, highly likely that there are slivers of Einstein sitting in attics, basements, and forgotten lab drawers all across America.
That is a haunting thought. A piece of the man who explained the universe, just collecting dust in a basement somewhere in Ohio.
It brings us right back to the start. The man who wanted to be cremated and forgotten scattered on a river. Instead, he is literally scattered across the globe, magnified on iPads, and gawked at in museums. It's the exact opposite of what he wanted.
So, after all of this, the theft, the cider box, the road trip, the decades of study, what does it all mean? Did we find the secret of genius?
I don't think we found the secret. I think we found correlations. We found that his brain was unusual in specific ways that aligned beautifully with his known skills. But we can't prove causation. We just can't. However, I think the story itself tells us something profound about us.
How so?
The obsession with his brain, this whole 70-year saga, it proves how desperate we are to understand human potential. We look at Einstein and we see the absolute pinnacle of what a human mind can achieve, and we want to reverse engineer it. We want to believe that if we just tweaked the hardware a bit, if we just widened the parietal lobe or thickened the corpus callosum, we could all see the universe the way he did.
But maybe the magic wasn't in the matter.
Right. The brain is just the organ. The mind, the relentless curiosity, the persistence, the imagination, the absolute refusal to accept authority, that's what made him Einstein. The brain was just the tool he happened to use.
That's a really beautiful way to put it.
And I'll leave you with this thought. If we scanned 1,000 geniuses today, writers, musicians, physicists, artists, would we find a single unifying pattern? Or is there no single way to be a genius? Maybe Einstein's brilliance wasn't that he had a better brain, but that he had a uniquely different brain, and he found the one specific problem in the universe that his specific, quirky brain was perfectly designed to solve.
The lock and the key.
Exactly. And perhaps the search for the physical seed of genius says more about the limitations of our own brains than it does about the limitlessness of his.
Wow. That is a lot to process.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to need a minute to let my own very average synapses fire on that one. Thank you for guiding us through this very strange anatomical road trip.
My pleasure. It's certainly a trip I won't forget.
And to you, listening, thanks for taking the dive with us. Next time you look up at a star or see a beam of light cut across a room, remember the 1,230 grams of tissue that helped us understand what we're looking at. And maybe, just maybe, check your attic for any forgotten microscope slides. You never know.
You really never know.
Catch you next time.